But tonight, we are going to welcome Archer Mayer back for his 26th reading. Now, this is truly... Who has never been to an Archer Mayer reading here? Oh, okay, great. So this is Joe Gunther's 30th book, or the 30th book about Joe Gunther. And I have to say, I wished I had aged as slowly as he and his Archer Mayer gleans his information for these mysteries from real-life work, which I'm sure he'll talk about. EMT, firefighter, ski patroller, former detective, and currently he's death investigator for Vermont's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Prior to his stint in Vermont, he graduated from Yale, and he worked as an editor, a researcher, a journalist, and a historian, both here and overseas. And when I was writing that, I thought, I wonder when Joe's gonna take a trip abroad. Anyway, without further ado, please help me welcome Archer Mayer.
So I've been told I have a loud mouth. So we are eschewing the use of the microphone, which gives you two choices. You can either raise your hand and lip read to me, I can't hear a bloody thing you're saying, or you can doze off. So the option is yours, and I will take my cue accordingly. I either will be louder, or I'll get softer and softer so that you can all join the person who set the pace. But I presume that won't be the case because I have my own format, just like these guys have theirs. My format is that I break the proverbial ice by trying to remember what the hell I did in book 30, which is, there's a requirement, by the way, you're not allowed to leave the building until you bought 5 hardbacks of this copy. That part wasn't really announced. It seems only reasonable I should do so. But once that's been achieved, I'm sure they'll let you out. But I will struggle to retain some vague memory of what's in this book. And only upon your reading the book will you discover how wrong I was. The reason that that happens is because 31 is already done. So I'm editing it, or I should be if I weren't enjoying your company. Therefore my head is stuffed with that book, not this book, the title of which already escapes me. Thank you, Bomber's Moon, of course. Bomber's Moon is just a somewhat darker way of referring to a full moon, by the way. And the reference to Bomber's Moon is because of something I rather enjoyed during my World War II research enthusiasms, which was that an airplane in those days needed bright light to see where to drop its bombs at night, because they didn't have all this fancy gewgaws that we now have, most of which are in our pockets and have been required to be muted for the next hour. But there's an irony built in that all writers, of course, enjoy, and that is beware what you wish for, because if you can see them, they can see you. And what better metaphor for someone who writes bloody-minded books like mine to utilize. So Bomber's Moon is referred to on multiple occasions in this book by people whose hubris gets a little bit too much for them to bear, and so we eliminate them. Which is what I tend to do. That's why I think one of the reasons I'm now a medical examiner, because most of the people I spend time with are dead. I decided I might as well make that tax exempt. So Bomber's Moon has a couple of layers on it. On a plot basis, as usual, it's complicated because I am a complicated guy. But the plot has sort of 3 engines running within it. One is a thief named Alex And Alex sounds like a fabulous creation of my overworked imagination, because he's clever and smart, and he loves complicated acts of thievery whereby some dumb mope, as we used to say in the police department, would just grab your purse and run like stink. Alex still wants your purse, but he wants to go about it in a sort of challenging, creative, innovative, and original way. And of course, one looks at a character like that, at least I do in most TV shows or movies or something like that, and I go, oh, pshaw, you know, that's not the way these guys actually really work. They just grab the purse. However, Alex is based on a guy I worked with. Well, I used as a confidential informant. Alex was also, my guy, who wasn't named Alex, was also a thief. But when I first met him, a fellow investigator who introduced me said, I should warn you before you meet this guy, you're going to want your daughter to marry him. That's not usually the company we keep in this line of work. These are not people one envies, or certainly one wants to invite into the family bosom. But by God, he was right. This guy was, in one word, seductive. He was just charming, smart as all gets out. This was a guy you really want to hook your canoe to and go for a wild ride. The problem is that he couldn't function within the confines of an organized society. So he ended up, in prison and doing all the lousy things that far less engaging colleagues do. But it was a real shame, and I always sort of rued the fact that this real guy never got what his qualities deserved. He certainly got what society deserved to give him, and by God, it gave it to him, because he wouldn't stop, and he did misbehave. But I decided to fictionalize him ever so slightly. I made him into this character, Alex, and I hope you'll enjoy his company. For as long as I allow you to keep his company, of course. On another level, there is a prep school, boarding school, in the state of Vermont, named Thorndike Academy. Don't bother Googling it, it doesn't exist. Oftentimes, if I take a company or an institution or something like that and I decide to bring it to its knees, I make it up, because even I know how to spell libel. So Thorndike was based on the research I did by going to the Putney School and interviewing the head of finance there. And of course, I'm a guy who most people know for one reason or another. Liza rattled off all my occupations, and I have all sorts of people coming out of odd corners saying, oh, God, I haven't seen you since a long time. In fact, yesterday I delivered a piece of granite to be polished up a little bit, and the guy took the order and looked at me a little oddly, and I went, oh God, here it comes. And he said, oh, I know who you are. And I went, okay, who am I? And he said, you arrested me in Bellows Falls. So I'm not quite sure how that job's going to come back to me. If you find of my disappearance, start going to the deepest part of ponds. You'll probably find a small piece of concrete attached around my neck. Polished, though. Like that. The guy looked like he was proud of his work, so I suspect he's going to do that much, at least, before he kills me. That prep school approach, when I talked to the finance guy at the Putney School, and I said, look, I want to do all sorts of skullduggery in this boarding school and really reveal its underbelly and do nasty things to it. And his whole face lit up and said, oh, you've come to exactly the right guy. I encountered this with sort of frightening regularity, by the way. People were more than delighted, including people inside the old Vermont Yankee, who are more than happy to tell me how to blow the place up. Next time you're working next to one of your colleagues, beware what might be lurking in his or her heart. Last but not least, of course, we have just sort of the regular goings-ons of Joe Gunther and his gang, and they're in mad pursuit of something that starts the book off in very mundane fashion, which is a drug death. Drug deaths are something that I attend on a boringly monotonous basis, and most of us just sort of step over the bodies and collect all the facts and put together the case and catch lunch. And indeed, this book starts off in a similar vein until, of course, it goes completely off the rail. Because after all, I did have to build 300 pages, so I can't end the book on chapter 1. I've been told that's poor form. There are a variety of other wrinkles and ins and outs going on. There are a couple of sort of aborning characters. I have a coterie that keeps me company, Joe Gunther, the boss, and a couple of his crewmates, Sammy, Willie, and Lester. But in addition, I'm bringing on board with increasing frequency 2 young women in their 20s. One is the daughter of the tag man, who was a fellow in a book many books ago now. And the other is a young woman named Rachel, who is the daughter of Beverly Hillstrom, the medical examiner. So these 2 creatures keep coming back into the books. I don't actually plan these books. I don't lay them out. I don't outline them. I actually have no friggin' idea how I'm doing what I do. But I seem to have been doing it for a number of decades, so it's a sort of a locked-in habit with me. But I like writing from ignorance, and I like satisfying my own curiosity with the hope that my results, my findings, will float your boats as well. And that's sort of why I stumble and lurch through this process. But in that process, I find these make-believe characters, some of whom I find compelling and interesting, and one of them was even a Joe Gunther girlfriend. And yet, for some reason or another, I knock them off. And others who may be far less appealing and less attractive to you readers, perhaps, not that I would know, I can't get rid of them. And indeed, Willie Kunkel, who appeared in the very first book, I've been trying to get rid of him for 30 books. And all he does is now dominate the series so that Joe Gunther is almost a bit player. And all of you guys just wait for Willie. And indeed, all he needs to do is come into a room. He doesn't need to say anything. And everyone goes, oh, it's a Willie moment. Now, why you are so positively infected by this ne'er-do-well, who, for you uninitiated, is actually a cop, is not surprising to me. In fact, my daughter, and I've told this to people before, has asked me when the question and answer part comes, which is looming nigh, so get ready to ask me questions. Said, well, are they still asking you, are you the real Joe Gunther? And I said, oh, sure, it comes up every once in a while. People who haven't read the series think I'm Joe Gunther. And she went, am I the only one who really knows you're Willie Kunkel? And, I don't refute that. Every morning in the mirror, I see a whole hell of a lot more Willie than Joe stands a chance. Maybe that's why I wrote the series of books about Joe, is because I think he's someone that we should aspire to. I mean, we could all do well to have at least 60% Joe Gunther days. I would argue that most of us, in fact, probably have 60 to 70% Willie Kunkel days. I certainly do. But then he's my creation, so I'm entitled. But it is a quizzical thing in that I decided from the get-go, if design ever came into it, it came into it at this point, that when I set out to write the series of books, and it wasn't designed as a series, not an interminable 30-book series. That just has to do with poor income. But it was intended to continue beyond a single book. And in that design, I wanted to have a guy, a hero, who was not encumbered with all the standard flaws that we've become so used to, all the way back to Mickey Spillane and up to whatever show is just recently on ABC or whatever on TV. And that is, you know, recovering alcoholic, 3 times divorced, kicks his dog, you know, whatever. And indeed, in the business of Hollywood and TV and writing and whatnot, they even have little labels for these guys. Oh, he has to be encumbered. It makes it sound like a piece of real estate. And other such labels are needed. Oh, one is called The Sword. The first time I heard that, I was taken aback. You know, I studied my Greek like all of us good scholars, but I didn't realize we were still referring to those kind of days. But the sword is that the hero is imperiled, and the sword is over his head. I decided that I'm going to write an entire series of books in which the mainstay is a decent, hardworking, regular, dare I say, Joe. And I even designed the first several books. Now it's not so mechanical, but the first several books on purpose, by design. I had him make mistakes. He would stumble, he would screw up, and he would atone well as make mistakes well. And this was the guy that I wanted us to eventually sort of cozy up to and make our own, was someone who is avuncular, a team player, a supporter, a thoughtful, kind, decent, morally righteous but not self-righteous dude. Now I'll give you Joe Willie Kunkel, no problem. I mean, we'll balance all this goody two-shoes stuff with other slices of humanity, and indeed I would argue that just as Joe is almost impossibly good, Willie is almost impossibly bad. I don't know, I mean, you guys all enjoy seeing him, but I doubt that any of you would like working with him. Okay, because he doesn't suffer, you know, fools be damned, he doesn't suffer anybody well, and he would get under your skin pretty darn quick. But we all have that in us. I would argue that everybody in this room has Willie moments throughout every day. If we're good about it, we curb it, or we try to correct it, or we make apologies for it, but there it is. And I think that's one of the reasons that we like Willie Kunkel, is because we have that commonality with the guy. You know, oh, you know, I know who he's talking about, or I recognize that in myself sometimes. Therefore, I am writing this series of books about us, yes, because they are in Vermont and they do take place in real towns and they refer to real processes and whatnot. And they have names plucked from the world around us. But when it came to the two major characters, Willie and Joe, what I did was take a full, complex, three-dimensional human being and split them into two characters, so that you can sort of see what goes on in our own private brains take place between two individuals. I just thought it would make it a little bit, bring it more in 3 dimensions if I did it that way. And I have to admit, 30 books, or now 31 books later, I have not rued that decision. I feel pretty good about these two guys, which is why I've never been able to knock off Willie Kunkel. I've crippled him now and then, but I haven't knocked him off. And Joe Gunther, I also mishandled enough that I got a reader's comment many, many books ago that said, please, could you write at least one book where he doesn't get beaten up? So I did that, and now it's become a habit. I haven't had him submit to a pounding in quite a few books, so I think it's time to take it out behind the woodshed and really give him another work over. But I don't know yet. It hasn't happened in book 31. He is 92. After all. You have to be somewhat gentle. For you uninitiated, Joe Gunther began all these many, many years ago, 1988. In open season, he began, believe it or not, talk about a faux pas, or a fox pass. He began as a Korean War veteran nearing retirement. It's been a hell of a retirement. Now Vermont is very broad-minded. It'll hire the likes of me for all these things that Liza rattled off. That's already pretty quirky. But I don't think we have too many 90-year-old law enforcement officers. But we do in fiction, if not in fact. So I'm now going to turn the tables on you and suggest that hands begin to crawl into the air. And so I can find out why on God's earth you would come out tonight of all nights when we're on the brink of being floated away with Noah's Ark. So who's got a question? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that you just triggered when you were talking about the whole being of being Willie and Joe.
Yeah.
And a lot of hours and perspective coming from me kind of thing, being you, the author. I'm curious about where the feminine view comes in. I mean, Gail was a big part of the early books.
Yeah.
You've kind of floated with other girlfriends and as it's gone through, and you've had a couple of medical examiners. Where does the feminine come in? Is this really a male book written by a male for males and women are
no,
just
I guess I've always been, the question is about my female characters and where do they come from, given that I've been speaking about Joe, Willie, and other guys. I come from an extraordinarily sort of women-dominant family. Some people are laughing at my unkillable mother who finally died at the age of 99. Sorry about that. We all got to go, so she did. But she ran up as close to my father, who died at 99, as she possibly could. And then she said, "How to hell with it," and that was the end of that. So, and when she died, she had a photo of him in her hand. So I thought that's what this whole thing was about. So good for her. We talk very openly about this, all of us do. So it's not. Thank you for your oohs and ahs. But at 99, she was delighted to die. So she was so sick of that age and suffering from the aches and pains, and so she went with a smile on her face. In fact, her very last words were, "I love you." Pretty good. But having said that, my mom, who is seen as a fairly dominant presence in the family, I'm the bottom of 6 kids, 4 sisters, and myself and my brother. But my mom was just the latest in a long line of women who have been extraordinarily powerful in the family. My grandmother, my great aunt, who was one of the world's prominent sculptors in her time. In fact, in 1915, I think she was numbered among the top 20 paid American women in the country. She made monumental sculptures, things like Joan of Arc and El Cid. I don't know how many of you guys know New York City, but going down 6th Avenue, it's not good, Avenue of the Americas, I think it's called. It's been called that for 60 years, but it shows how far I go back. But there's a statue monumentally sized of Jose Marti grabbing his gut because he's just received a bullet and his horse is rearing up and he's about to topple off backwards. He's the liberator of Cuba. And my aunt did that. And if you manage to get a ladder and crawl all the way up there, one of the hoofs is up like that and my initials are in the hoof. The squirrely little brat that I was, I managed to climb up the day before, the night before the casting. And I put my initials in the hoof. Great. Wherein birds have been depositing gifts ever since, I'm sure. But there it is, I'm happy to say. And you can't prove me wrong unless you fly up there. It's about 2 stories in the sky, so I hope it's still there. I presume it is. So I was not only brought up with that, but I was brought up with the expectation that that was perfectly normal, and never questioned the the balancing beam, if you will, between the genders was always perfectly attuned in my family. the historical stuff that I acquired through exposure to outside culture, or obviously through reading and newspapers and books and whatnot, and just looking at the real world, you would see that in fact that balance beam was way out of whack. Allowed me, I think, because of the balance in my family, to look at women in the context of my book as in a different way than was the cultural norm. I don't know if that addresses what your question came from, but that was always sort of a standard in my family. I don't know how better to address your question. If you have an additional one, feel free to launch it.
No, it was just that you were so clear in saying the complete being of Joe and Willie together was a whole being, and I just wondered if, since that was clearly masculine and you were clearly saying our, whether the feminine had to be a separate whole being that you were trying to do with the women.
Well, yes, I'm not so
description,
la-di-da and Pollyanna as to say that all boys and girls are exactly the same. I don't think that's true.
Right.
So my access to the characters of Beverly Hillstrom, who's the medical examiner, and I've only had her throughout the whole series, or Gail, who became governor of the state of Vermont in the series, and other powerful women, that has obviously been culled from other sources, but they've been very proximate sources to me growing up. Yes?
Roger, in your current book, you've done an absolutely magnificent job of describing what we would probably describe as the underclass, the buildings that are half deserted and the towns that appear that way. I'm curious to know whether you would be interested in doing something, not what is, but what will be. The hollowing out of some of the smaller Vermont towns, the farms that are disappearing. Had you ever thought of bringing anything like this into your mysteries?
Well, I think I do to a certain extent. I guess I don't set myself tasks like that, so as I write the books and they present themselves in a natural way, I'll put them into the forefront. It's interesting you touch on that in this particular book, because one of the things I intended to touch on in my sort of chaotic introduction was that one of the things that I did focus on in this book was, call it extremes. There we have the mega rich, the mega poor, the kindness of Joe, and the unmitigated evil of some of the people who are just sociopaths in this book. Not Hannibal the cannibal, but real sociopaths, the type of people we are surrounded by. These are just people with no moral conscience whatsoever. And unfortunately, they populate the earth as much as the good guys do, and we've gotten used to that. So that goes also to, call it, the socioeconomic portrait that I make of their environs and of Vermont in general, across all these books, but more particularly in this book. I don't know why. I think because we live in extremist times, certainly, at least as I see them currently, that it allowed me to be influenced by that within the confines of this book. So there is a certain tipping of the hat to current events and to some disturbing trends, in my view, that I want to bring into these books. These are not, as I see it, escapist books. These are social anthropologies. They happen to have good guys, bad guys, dead guys, and car chases because I want to sell the damn thing. And selling social anthropology, I don't think I'd be 30 books later talking to you if that was, the title, the overall umbrella of the book. But I think, given the world we live in, you can have both. I certainly have both. I'm around loss, chaos, homicide, drug overdoses, dead bodies, every single week. This is my life. People ask me what my writing schedule is. That is my writing schedule My daughter calls it the silver bell, for it tolls for thee. When it goes off, I go off, and whatever schedule I had planned that day wraps around that reality. So last time I was on shift a couple of weeks ago, I had 7 calls. So given that kind of pacing, you're exposed to an amazingly broad spectrum of the kind of stuff that we glance at in the papers or that we're dimly aware of on the radio. Well, that's my life. My wife laughs and says that these are my peeps. And indeed, even if I didn't have that particular job, again, we go back to Liza's introduction, my life for years and years, decades and decades, has been festooned with people in need and in trouble. All of these jobs are emergency response jobs of one sort or another. When I was a cop, for example, I very quickly stopped busting guys who polish granite in uniform by pulling them over, and I very quickly went into plainclothes work, and I did sex crimes against kids. So it's been a dark world. I'm a dark guy, and I need to use this series of books as a conduit, as a way to put some of that in my head, which I drag around like some sort of, ghost lugging a corpse. I need to put that to constructive, useful purpose. And I do so through this series of books. A lot of people say, oh, well, God, murder mysteries, for God's sake, you're not driving a new truck. If you want a new truck, you need to write some other book and become a mega bestseller whiz-bang thing. And I said, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this for what I hope is the social and humanistic import of it. These books, although they are murder mysteries, should matter to a certain degree. Otherwise, what the hell have I been doing for 30 years? I mean, it would be trivia incarnate. You guys, you can buy a book and read a murder mystery and go on with your life. That's just a treat. I'm writing the bloody things. I spend my entire life doing these things. They've got to matter. They can't be trivial brain candy. I can't look at it that way, and I'm not so cynical, even though I may be, not so cynical that I would spend my entire professional life turning out cotton candy. So your observation comes deep to my heart. I appreciate your thumbs up, and it is indeed what I do pay attention to and what I will continue to pay attention to. So I don't know exactly what I'm setting out to do in each book, but I am, I think, on a parallel track to what you evoked. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment and then a question. I took a trip this summer and I, for the first time in a long time, listened to books on tape, or now it's on CBC, and it happened that one of them was the Willie Gunther going to his wife's, Willie Kunkel, confusing there. But he went to find out how his wife had died and his ex-wife had died, etc.
The sniper's wife. Yeah.
Yes, and whenever I read one of your books, I race right through because I want to find out how it goes. But when I was listening to it, I couldn't believe how your descriptors and how you set the mood and how you notice things in the environment and how it just blew me away to listen to what choice of words you used. It was amazing and startling to me that I had never noticed that before. That's my comment, and if nobody's, and that one was read by somebody who was just top notch. So if nobody's ever listened to one of your books, they should, just for the language. The second one I listened to was, took place, was the frozen body at Mount Stowe. And in that you had to find out the history of what was going on at Stowe 50 years ago, and you had to know how the people in Canada worked their cases. It just seemed to me that you had done a huge amount of research for that. And I'm just curious, does that apply to most of your books, or was this an
All
exceptional
of
one? Okay. Could you talk about how you
Sure.
feel about that?
Sure. That was the Marble Mask, the
Yeah.
second one that you referred to,
Terrific.
which has a slightly comedic source to it, by the way, since you invoked the frozen body on the top of Mount Mansfield. I thought, wouldn't it be amusing if we found such a corpse up there? And because although I have written murder mysteries where I've forgotten to murder someone during the editing, I gotta conjure one up. So there it was. And this was a real popsicle. I mean, this was a hard, frozen body. Well, I don't know that you're aware of this, but Mount Mansfield thaws every summer. It's a nice place to hike. So you're not going to get up. So obviously that body didn't just end up there and stay there. It had to have been
Somewhere else.
refrigerated somewhere
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
placed there. So this was, so I went up to my science people, because I have a huge black, Rolodex of notorious sources. And I went to one of them and I said, okay, give me the science, okay? This guy's been in the deep freeze for decades, and we're trying to pretend that he's a fresh popsicle from this winter, okay, just to throw the cops off the scent. So you've got to be able to get into the molecular substructure of the frozen crystalline, whatever, and so you got to set me on the right path to lay this complex scientific principle online so that my readers can grasp it. And the guy looked at me, he said, hell, I just look in his wallet. So I do. There's no science. And sure enough, driver's license, currency, as is described in the book, we discovered. So that is part and parcel of the research I do. Every single book, now in that book I may have done more, others I do a little less, but every book is driven by research because, as I pointed out earlier, every book is driven by ignorance. I don't write what I know, I write what I just found out and what I want to share with you guys. And I want to share the cream of the research, so there's got to be a lot for there to be cream. As for your other comment about the language, thank you for mentioning that. These words are my musical notes, and the book is my instrument, like a piano might be to someone else. And therefore, when I write these books, yes, I get all snooty about social anthropology and all that stuff and my peeps and blah, blah, blah. And I'm paying attention to the psychological and emotional makeup of the women and the men in the book. But I also, I want to occasionally arrest your attention. I don't want to break the fictional daydream. I don't want to break the mental movie that a book should create to make you forget that your laundry's growing mildew and all that good stuff. I want you lost in that. But, and you can break that in a heartbeat as a writer, because you'll screw up. You'll put 7 bullets in a 6-gun, whatever it is that will snap the reader out of that daydream and go, oh God, I gotta take care of the kids, boom, that's it, you're gone. However, if I can distract you or catch your ear as I did yours by describing something, by writing something that in and of itself is melodious, cadenced, timed, and it has a sort of a musical rhythm to it, then that's an extra benefit for you.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm going to work very hard to do that. I will edit these 300-page books up to 15 times just to make sure that every phrase within every sentence, within every paragraph is crafted, molded, challenged, questioned, and weighed for its eloquence as well as its content. Yes?
Do you read aloud to yourself?
No.
Or do you do it just visually?
No more than I read aloud when I'm a reader. My correspondence with these works is very much to the reader within me. I came to be a writer by being a reader, and I see this as a collaborative art. The whole idea of like Norman Mailer, who's your favorite writer, of course. I mean, guys who write within a closed circuit, I think are going to be less attuned to their readers' desires, needs, and abilities than someone who sees them as co-storytellers. So, is there anyone in this room, well, obviously the guys who have no idea who the hell I am can't answer this, but is there anyone in this room who doesn't have an image of Joe Gunther? I don't describe him. That's your image. So that's the collaboration. I will set up a voice, I will set up a circumstance, and then I will fade away because I want to invoke and play with your creativity and your imagination. So you've got to bring some water to the well here so that we can all drink from the same satisfying experience. That's a writer's gimmick or trick, if you will. Yes?
Are you still doing, I can't remember what it was, but contests or fundraising for people to be a character in your book?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. In fact, on average, there'd be about 8. The absolutely worst experience of my life was when, for some reason or another, I paid no attention. I was getting carried away. I had 18 separate auction winners in one book. And I was considering doing the whole Arthur, whatever his name was, Haley, or I don't know what his name was, who used to occasionally put all the remaining characters at the end of a 500,000 page book and just cut the cable and down they went. You know, so I thought, well, I'll just put 10 of them in a rowboat and sink it. You know? And the last page would be, you know, our sorrow goes out to the families of, and I'd be done. So that was a bit of a challenge. But every other book, and now we're going back many, many, many books. And these are libraries or hospitals or, you know, whatever, you know, good causes. And it was born a long time ago. Someone said, would you give me some money? I said, I'm a writer, for God's sake, wake up, you know, we don't have money. And they said, oh, well, will you give us a hardback? And I said, well, that's, in those days, you know, $20, that's not gonna get you any money. But I had heard through the grapevine someone else had done this, and that's what began this slippery slope. Was I said, well, okay, I'll auction off being a character in a Joe Gunther book. But right from the start, I knew to put 2 crucial reservations on that offer. First reservation is, I don't want to meet you. I don't care who you are, I just want your name. Okay, don't call me, don't tell me about yourself, and sure as hell don't have me out for dinner. Okay? The other thing is, I get to do anything I want with that name. And of course, initially people will go, oh, okay, no, that's fine, and I could tell by their expression, you're not getting it. You're giving me Great Aunt Hetty, I have a dead crack whore. And then there was that sort of moment of clarity. Oh, and some adjustments might need to be made. So, but yes, it's very much ongoing. You know, I like to be useful and helpful to people, and if that somehow I can do it, and yeah, I need my money for my truck payments, but you can have the characters. Yeah. Sorry.
I have a comment and then a question also. I sort of discovered you, you were probably about 15 books into the series, but very dutifully when I discovered you, I went back to book 1 and read through, and it took me a while to catch up because you kept writing, which was a good thing, but probably I've been caught up with you for the last 6 or 7 books, at least maybe a little bit longer. And I read a lot of series, but there's something now that, particularly now that I've caught up, that is so unique about your books. And I'm not sure how it relates to what you're talking about before, maybe a slightly different spin. But I feel that I have a personal relationship with Joe and Lily and Sammy that's unlike almost any other series I've read. And I'm now at a point now that each time you write a new book, it's a chance for me to get reacquainted with my good friends.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful, I think it's tied into your writing style, your choice of language, your plotting, the way you describe how you created Joe, just all comes together. These are my friends, and thank you very much for giving them to me. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful gift. Now, after that flourishing comment, my question is fairly mundane, although it's built upon what you had said before. You were talking about how Alex in this book is based on a real-life person. Well, I started reading this, waiting for you to get here, and I immediately recognized Sally, and I knew who she was. I didn't immediately remember her name, but very quickly, she's the Tagman's daughter. Was the Tagman ever based on anything real?
Oh, don't you? No.
That's the question.
Well, it's a great question because the parallel is with Willie Kunkel. So just as most of us will sort of reluctantly agree with the fact that, yeah, I've had a Willie Kunkel moment or two, maybe even today, and then you walk away from that statement. I would argue that in our hearts and souls, there is someone either voyeuristic or nosy or invasive, or someone opens up their mailbox at the post office with you. The great sort of parallel in Vermont for the local bar is the post office. And just this morning, for example, I'm helping this old lady empty out her mailbox because it's so stuffed her arthritic fingers can't even get it out. Well, I'm happy to help. We're old pals, and of course, every piece I drag out, I take a look at it. It's just human nature. It's like, oh my God, you subscribe to that? And you have some fun at their expense, and so therefore, when I created Mr. Kravitz, Dan Kravitz, the Tagman, I just took what I think is a fairly common human trait and maximized it. I made this guy. So here, funnily enough, is a quirky fictional character because we are tiptoeing into a realm that is actually fairly uncomfortable. So, you've got Dan Kravitz, and you've got the Tagman, you've got checking out the mail, and that's fine, and that's groovy. But we also live in a society where I don't even have a smartphone, but most of you guys have a smartphone. Well, you're not alone. And what I mean by that is that your smartphone is inhabited. You're not alone because you have people in your pocket along with your smartphone. They're listening, they're gathering data, every time you turn that sucker on, or every time you move from room to room to room, they're tracking you, they're paying attention. Now, do we care? I don't happen to be that paranoid, so I don't actually give a damn. No one much cares what I'm doing or what I'm buying or where I'm going, so I don't want to have a smartphone because they're just too bloody complicated, and I don't want things ringing in my pocket. But nevertheless, that's Dan Kravitz on speed. And that can be creepy. We've actually obviously been very aware of when it is creepy. And so now I sort of have this good guy who is doing very possibly not good guy things, and I love that balancing act. I like that tightrope thing. So his daughter is very much on the side of angels, but her job is not what he does. Her job is a private investigator. So she is nosy also. She puts her nose in people's other business, but she does so according to the rules. But she doesn't want to be a cop because she doesn't want to be that hogtied, because she was brought up by this father who is absolutely not hogtied. Now, just to give you an idea what Dan Kravitz and how he cut his teeth, he no longer does this, but how he built up his own pastime and income base and all the rest. He used to break into people's houses he would steal information. In other words, he would put little gremlins on all the devices we've just been talking about, the tablets and the computers and the smartphones and all the rest. You would never know that. But he had a tracer that went back to his central computer file, and every time you make a phone call or every time you reach out or send an email to someone, he gets that contact, and that virus goes over to that device. So he's got thousands, having just ripped off 10, 12, 20 himself, and it just goes out like crazy. So he's kind of a one-man NSA, and he sits very happily in his computer-laden office with no windows and one door, and he gathers information. He's just a junkie. He doesn't use this malevolently. If he gets a good investment opportunity, he'll take advantage of it. Insider trading, no one knows that. He just buys a few stocks. He makes money. In fact, he put Sally through very high premium cost education with no scholarship. Thank you very much. So, you know, is he a crook? Is he not a crook? It depends on how you approach that. So I like that ambivalence. So welcome to Dan Kravitz, another guy I couldn't get rid of. Yes.
Well, in preparation for reading Farmer's Moon, I reread Pac-Man, and I started to notice things on a different level than I had before. And the first was about Dan, that in a way he seemed like an alter ego of you, the author.
Sure is.
Guy.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I noticed was Joe going to a psychiatrist for the first time and complaining to the psychiatrist that he was just a shit magnet. And he had all these murders and all these bad things, and he kept getting shot at and all that. And I just thought, Joe Gunther has to go to a psychiatrist because of all that you've been putting him through.
Well, so have I.
So that was fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. No, I think they say that a lot of writers just have so much baggage they have to unload it in public in a way just to cope with some of it, and we either do or we don't do it more or less successfully. Some of us are hopeless drunkards on top of being writers, and other of us, like me, don't drink a drop. But we do plumb, I mean, we have to be, if we're attuned to this, we have to be writing about the same human beings you're familiar with, indeed yourself. I have to be able to describe my characters and write to you in a familial and familiar way, so that you know what I'm talking about, and you can finish my sentences. You can say, oh, I know exactly to whom he's referring. Those kind of proximities. Well, in order for me to do that, I've just got myself. I'm not a shrink, but I can look inside myself, and as part of my self-therapy, yes, I write books, but the other part is that it is helpful for me to untangle and organize and categorize and try to figure out a lot of what makes me tick. It's been a quirky life. It's had lots of rewards and wonderful things. It's had some true darkness in it that I haven't shared with anybody. So there's a mix mash of stuff that has occurred.
And we're the beneficiaries.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That's the outlet. That's the therapeutic part that I hope is not mine alone, but a shared benefit. Because you don't want to read someone's work who stands up on a soapbox and starts wagging their finger at you about either their problems or their knowledge or their axe to grind or whatever it is. There again, I want the reader to be in control. I want the reader to feel like this is her book and not that I'm the writer standing over everything and pushing you around. And so that's part and parcel of how my approach is what I just described, was to try to disappear, yes, but try to hit those familiar notes within all of us at the same time. It's a funny balance. That's why the editing and the editing and the editing is I really want to hit that, not just the music of the language, but also the delicacy of the psychology. We may have run out of gas. That's what Mickey's big hand is saying. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.